Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Daily. I'm glad you made it. Hey, look, two heads are better than one, right? So here we are. We're going to bounce things off of each other. I'm Jason from Veterans Info Tap, and then we got Clay here from the CivDiv. And I'm taking the stage here up front on this video just to get the ball rolling for us. And I'm sure that Clay won't shut up once we get going, so it'll be fun. So what we're talking about here today is very, very important, and I wanted to make sure that we catch everybody up to speed. And this is those proposed changes that are coming down from the VA. Now, we're getting all kinds of information from all kinds of different sources, whether it's news articles or other videos. There's a lot of information. And what I wanted to share with you, and we're going to dive into it piece by piece by piece. But first, most importantly, is the backdrop on where this is coming from, who said it, where's it at. And so I'm going to just kind of give you a couple snapshots from the VA directly. The VA posted in February of 2022 a couple news releases. One of the headlines was VA proposes updates to disability rating schedules for respiratory, auditory, and mental disorder body systems. For those that don't know, the schedule of ratings incorporates a bunch of different body systems. Could be musculoskeletal, could be mental health in this situation, could be neurological. So over time, the VA has been updating many of their rating schedules. And in fact, on that news release, they did state that since 2017, they have already made many changes to the different rating schedules. And in fact, I'm looking at the list here. There's about 8 or 10 of them, including dental and oral care, including musculoskeletal system and muscle injuries. So with that being said, these are changes that will be coming, undoubtedly. The question really is, what are they really going to entail? So the backdrop, again, is the fact that the VA has already announced it. The VA has already done this. The VA has already made changes to their rating schedules. That is true. Secondly, there was an opening up of the public comments for a 60-day period. That has long passed. So I want to pass it over to Clay here. And I wanted to ask, what are some of your thoughts on just the backdrop of all of this? Is this something that is taking speed? Where are we at in your mind with this process?
So if you look at the dates of when the proposed changes starts, which was February 22, you had the 60-day window, and it really ended in April of 22 after the point of commentation. You also have to remember that the PACT Act, which was a huge legislation, was also in 22. And so Congress, the VA can only do so much, especially huge changes like that. In my opinion, I believe that the PACT Act kind of overshadowed or took up the most time of 22. 23 rolled out. The VA's got this huge backlog. They don't have time for anything. 24 is finally here. The backlog has decreased, okay? The VA are submitting, they are adjudicating claims, but now it's time to look at, hey, let's revisit what we already have established. Just as you said, the criteria for mental health, the criteria for respiratory conditions, it's already there. You can go on Google and look at, hey, how is mental health going to be rated? And so I just think there was too much happening in 22. Now we're kind of revisiting this this mental health change and tinnitus change and sleep change in 24.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you believe that changes will take effect at some point.
Absolutely.
Now my question now is, do you think that there'll be any sort of political delay in implementing the changes because we're in an election year? Is that a possibility in your mind?
It is, right? So not to get too political, but the House is red, the Senate is blue, okay? These changes are going to occur in the Senate, and just looking from the outside, I would be very doubtful that anyone has like kind of that courage to make changes. And we're not talking small changes, right? So in 21, plantar fasciitis was updated and changed, right? That
Right.
is a big deal, but it's not huge. We're
Right.
talking mental health, which is one of the top 3. We're talking tinnitus, which is number 1,
Number
and
one.
sleep apnea, the number 1 secondary claimed
Yeah.
condition, right? Those are
Yep.
3
Yep.
bangers.
Yep.
I would be doubtful if anyone's kind of going to put their career on the line, so to speak,
Right.
this year.
Right.
Like, this is a huge year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. And I actually called my congressional representative's office in DC regarding this and asked them to reach out to their liaison at the VA to get some answers on, hey, is this dead on the vine? Is it still moving forward? Kind of get some sort of status for me. And, the VA, this is a VA change. It's not a congressional change. So it has nothing to do with Congress, right? So for those of you out there listening, Congress has nothing to do with this change. It's a VA department change. So if we're in an election year for a president, well, that's part of the president's cabinet, right? So I think that there's going to be some tiptoes around this until after the election. And frankly, I don't think it matters what president's in office, left or right. I don't think it matters. These are changes that are going to happen. And again, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, the changes. We have the proposal.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what all the public comments said. We don't know if the VA is making some adjustments based on the comments, right? They could reduce, for example, they could say, fine, instead of, and sorry to cut to the next topic, which is the tinnitus piece, but they could say, hey, instead of making tinnitus a non-rateable condition, we'll make it where it can have a 0% rating, which in my opinion at this point would be a win, because at least you could still have secondaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I wanted to share with the audience, right, is I just read an article on another rule from the VA, okay, and that this is going to be applicable in the sense of, would something like this actually come to fruition? And again, both of us agree, yes. We just don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but it's probably going to be close to what's proposed. But there are people out there that say, hey, look, it's already been a couple years, probably just be quiet and it'll go away. I don't agree. I think that this means you need to act quickly. And here's my little piece here. There is a new rule that allows the VA to adjust disability compensation to prevent overpayments for reservist and National Guard members. So if you know, and sorry to segue, but this is an important piece.
Mm-hmm.
If you are in the National Guard or the reserves, you can collect VA compensation. However, you can't collect like active duty time during your reserve time. So there's this double dipping rule that can happen. So what happens is sometimes veterans get overpaid. Then the VA has to take the money back. So they're working on this adjustment. But here's the piece that is actually applicable in comparison to what we're going through now with this discussion. In 2019, they proposed this rule to allow the VA to eliminate their disability compensation payments for people that go active duty from their reserve time, right? So this rule to eliminate disability pay while they're active duty was proposed in 2019. 2019. It's going into effect today, which is the middle of January. So it's in effect the middle of January of 2024. It got proposed in 2019. You're talking about a 5-year period.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are with this one that's been since 2022. So this just shows you that a proposed change could take many years. The writing's on the wall. And I think folks need to really pay attention to it and move forward and file as quickly as possible. Let's shift into the changes proposed for tinnitus and what sort of complications really that could pose to veterans that have not filed for tinnitus. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Clay.
so looking at the proposed changes, that tinnitus, in the most basic way I can put it, is a symptom of an underlying condition, right? And so right now we see the number one secondary to tinnitus is probably migraines, right? The second one is probably anxiety. And so what the proposed change, it kind of flips that and says, hey, well, if you have migraines or if you have anxiety and you have tinnitus, that's going to be a part of the symptomology of that condition. And this is for VA benefit rating purposes, not necessarily healthcare, right? So it's important to keep in the mind frame of VA rating purposes. Just like you have symptoms for anxiety, like panic attacks, like you might have depressive episodes, you might struggle connecting emotionally. Well, now there's going to be this tinnitus clause, right? If I had to guess, if I was in charge of where that would go, it's probably going to go a little lower on the poll because everyone has tinnitus, right? And so tinnitus is going to be a part of the symptomology of migraines and of anxiety. Now, there's two really goods and bads to this, right? The good part is, hey, it's not, again, in my opinion from right here, it might be easier to get migraines connected now. It might, right? It could very well not be the case, but it implies it's going to be easier to get migraines connected. The bad part is, hey, if you don't have any migraine evidence, and this is my number one question, is your tinnitus going to be the in-service event, which we know is required for every single claim,
Right.
be service connected? Is tinnitus going to count as the in-service event for migraines, for anxiety, for whatever?
Right.
That's my number one question.
And you bring up a good point, and I never really thought about it that way, as leveraging tinnitus in the symptom aspect for migraines. My thought process was more on the sense of, I have this other condition that's now service connected, and that's just part of the symptoms of it, right, for diagnosis purposes. So I like that you brought that up, because it did give me another way to look at it. And so what I see now is, and I know you're aware, maybe our audience is not, I've done videos on the other channel in the past, and I think you've done them as well. The internal document, VA document, basically a rating aid that lists all the MOSs and AFSCs and the likelihood of causing tinnitus or hearing problems, right? So that then, based on MOS, because that would be the easiest way probably, unless you actually complained of tinnitus during service. And for folks out there that don't know where we're going with this, it's the nexus, right? So it's the link between your condition and your time in service. So what we're talking about is, okay, let's say that the VA eliminates tinnitus completely. So now there is no tinnitus claims that can be filed ever. Well, how can you leverage your tinnitus for, let's say, migraines, or for your depressive or anxiety conditions? So what we're thinking here is a road to that could potentially be, okay, well, my MOS problems or tinnitus, and because of my tinnitus or due to my service connection through my MOS or AFSC, I worked on jet engines, I was mortars, I was artillery or whatever. So now you have tinnitus, undoubtedly, but they're not going to rate you for it. But that is due to your time in service. Then later on, 5 years later, you're depressed, you have migraine headaches, and you can leverage that as all part of your migraines, right? They all trace back to being service connected. So that's a good point, and I think that that's could be relevant. I think that the worry right now for folks is, for folks that are still in, right? Number one, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to file for tinnitus. And for folks that are out that maybe have never filed, because let's keep in mind, folks, there are somewhere around 17 million veterans, right, in the US. About 70% are not utilizing the VA for compensation purposes. That's a huge number. So of that 70%, I bet you there's a lot of people that have tinnitus, right? Or tinnitus. I say tinnitus. Some people say tinnitus. I don't know. Tomato, tomato, potato, potato. So I think that the writing's on the wall that it's going to change. We both agree on that. I think that acting now is appropriate. If it were me, If it were me and I had tinnitus and I was thinking, okay, I'm going to file a claim, but I have some other conditions that I'm going to file for too at some point. I just got to wrap some things up. I personally wouldn't wait. I'd throw in my tinnitus today and then still work on documenting all my other stuff, get all my evidence together, get my claim filed. Once my claim's filed and being worked on by the VA, I would then put in an intent to file for all my future stuff that I'm trying to gather up, right? The VA should probably move fairly quickly on a one-item claim, so you could get that adjudicated fairly quickly. And ideally, you get service connected for tinnitus. Now you have that in the bank, and you're good to go, and you can work on your other things. And again, my kind of rationale is we don't know when it's going to take. It could happen tomorrow. Do I think it would? No, I don't. But I go into a casino thinking I'm going to win, and I don't. So, it's one of those things where you know what you have today, take advantage of it. Any last words on the tinnitus piece from you, Clay?
Just if I'm a active duty service member, and a year from now the tinnitus change comes out, I'm still going to file for tinnitus, right? And I think what we're going to see happen to tinnitus is kind of an intermediate step, like obesity, right? Obesity is able to be recognized by the VBA or service connected, but you don't get anything for it. It's not a compensable disability. I think tinnitus,
unless you go to eating disorders, and then maybe,
maybe,
right?
But I think we're going to see tinnitus kind of transition into that intermediate step for migraines, for anxiety. Now, I am very well aware that's like a glass half full type deal.
Right.
There's a whole other side to that as well.
Yeah.
That is not as shiny, and that could very well happen. But I have hope that the VA is going to not make it harder for veterans to be service connected, given they have the evidence. Right.
Yeah.
That's the standard.
Yeah. And I mean, look, sadly, we're having these conversations now. And I think that this is the point of having this type of content and information that we're going to be pushing out weekly is to be ahead of the ball. So that way we can provide public comment when those windows open. For way too long, veterans have been blinded and not, walking around in a dark room. We're here to turn on the lights, right? And, this is happening now and today, and so it's relevant. But fast forward in time, and we're going to be talking about this stuff as it's happening, and with calls to action. Look, we need to put in our public comment. We need to reach out to our, elected officials. We need to work collectively for things we believe in. So, great points. Let's shift over. Let's move over now to the next item on the proposed changes, which is the sleep apnea. And if I remember right, currently in today's world, here we are, January of 2024. If I have sleep apnea through a sleep study, right? I go get my sleep study, and I have sleep apnea, and I get prescribed a CPAP for my sleep apnea, and it's all service connected, right? It's all that part's taken care of. I'm going to be rated at 50% simply based on the fact that I've been prescribed a CPAP.
Yes.
50% is an outstanding rating. So my thought here is, as the VA's changes are proposed to reduce that, if I remember right, down to a 0% if treatable with a CPAP. What do you think the VA's looking at as far as treatable is concerned? Because in my mind, I don't have sleep apnea, so I don't know. But in my mind, just sleeping with a CPAP, I am not sleeping very well at all.
That's the veteran's number one argument. Of everyone I know, my personal friends, the majority of them have sleep apnea, and only 2 of them actually use their CPAP. Because they just simply can't sleep. It's loud, it's clunky. You got stuff on your. I don't even like if my wife touches me in bed. I'm like, hey, get over there, let me sleep here. So the treatable so of all the proposed changes, this one is most weird. So basically, right now we see the 38 CFR as treatment-based ratings. The VA does not want treatment-based ratings. As you say, 50%, that's a solid rating. And if you have sleep apnea, the most common sleep apnea is obstructive. That's what requires the CPAP. There's central, and that has a 30% rating. I've only seen one veteran with a central sleep apnea, right? It's overwhelming majority obstructive sleep apnea. And so now the proposed changes aren't treatment-based, but it's actually symptoms. Now, let's talk hypertension real quick. It's going to be very similar to hypertension. The most common rating is 0%, which is crazy because hypertension is a very serious condition, right? It's that will kill you, right?
Right.
But the most common rating is 0%. The second most common rating is 10%, which again is very low, but it's because it's treatable with medication, right? There's a diastolic and systolic number there. Then there's an or statement that says or medication handles that. I think that's what we're going to see with sleep apnea, right? Where you see the 0% for most ratings, and then you see the lower number saying, yeah, you got sleep apnea, but you have a CPAP, so you'll be all right. That's the layman version of the proposed sleep apnea change.
Right. So what I understand, and I'd like to hear your kind of thought on this, if implemented as written from the VA for this proposed change of sleep apnea, it seems to me like this is what they're going to have to do. Okay, fine. You have sleep apnea. Got it. It's going to be service connected. Got it. Your sleep study shows, and we decide you need a CPAP. Great. But now, in order to provide you a correct rating, we actually need to do a sleep study with you with your CPAP to see if it's, if it's actually working. Because what are they going to do? Are they going to ask you if you're, so is the CPAP working for you? No, it's not. They're not going to ask you. They're going to need evidence, right? So how are they going to do it? Is that kind of what you're thinking is going to have to happen?
I think that it could be. That's very that's resource intensive. That's more money, right?
Yeah.
Just as the VA is with this proposed rating, they could save money. They're going to be spending it on more CMP exams. Okay.
Right.
So that's an
Overnight.
aspect. Yeah, that's an aspect there. And then that also assumes that veteran during that test can sleep with that CPAP and they can get accurate readings. How many times has a veteran gone in for a sleep study, said, hey, it's inadequate, we need to do another one, right? So now what's going to happen? That's more resource intensive. There's just, it's the most weird to me. There's tons of questions I have. Of the ones that we see with tinnitus, sleep apnea, and mental health, sleep apnea has my full attention, right? And there's nothing we can do about it. We just have to wait. We have to wait and see. I would love to see the commentations or the commentary period for sleep apnea. And just kind of see who weighed in on how that diagnostic test and that symptomology test would actually happen.
Right. Because you can't just you can't ask. I mean, you can't just, okay, come in for your CMP exam. How's the CPAP working for you? It's so they're going to have to. The way I'm viewing this is the VA. To the VA, I can say it's not working. Prove to me, VA, that it's not. That I'm not being treated well with my CPAP. I should be at 50% because it's not working. Prove to me otherwise is kind of the methodology. So then the VA is going to have to go, okay, well, we're going to have to do either they're going to send you home with a thing and you got to, test yourself or whatever. But in some way, they're going to have to test you whether it works or not.
Yeah. Something else to add.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Something else to add to sleep apnea is what could also happen is once you have that initial sleep study, you need a CPAP. There's diagnostic and symptomology tests associated with the reason you need a CPAP. So you could very well take that initial test and use that. The issue then is that implies it's going to be high because you need a CPAP, right?
Right.
Which is the most common form of sleep apnea. And so, just to kind of observe all options, you could see new veterans claim sleep apnea, get rated still at a high percentage just based off of their symptoms, right? Again,
Right.
that's a glass half full type deal. Now, I doubt it, to be honest with you, but that could
Right.
very well happen.
Right. And here on the press release from the VA, instead of digging through the Federal Register, because that is a lot of reading, on the press release, it says regarding the criteria for sleep apnea that they're going to view it by evaluating it based on the symptoms responsiveness to treatment. If symptoms are fully treated by a CPAP machine or other treatment, a veteran would be rated at 0% and not receive compensation. So it goes back to the, right, prove to me that it's not responsive to treatment, right? And how are they going to do that? So that's something that's going to have to be, I guess, prepared for. And it also leads me to believe that if you get a higher rating, you can bet your bottom dollar that the VA is going to have future exams set for you to make sure that they're not going to, hey,
That's
look,
a
you're good now. We're
fantastic
going to
point.
reduce you. Right.
Yeah.
So important to know and be aware of. Are there any secondary conditions from sleep apnea that you could think of while we're kind of on the sleep apnea
Yeah.
aspect?
There's
Now, granted, it doesn't matter if you're a 50% or a 0%. If you have it, you have it. So there could be secondaries that you could utilize.
Yeah, so there's two most common. One is very, very common. The other one is kind of 50-50, right? The most common secondary to sleep apnea is hypertension. Obviously, if you have obstruction in your system, your veins are getting constricted, right?
Yeah.
It's making your heart work harder.
Oh,
You got hypertension, right? Which sucks. Hypertension is not good
no.
by
Yeah.
any means. And
Right.
another secondary that is kind of 50-50, and it depends on you. Something I say about secondaries is, does your condition cause this, right? It's
Right.
not a one size fits all. But
Of
if you
course.
have stress on your body, right? The
Mm-hmm.
inside of your body is always like
Yep.
this. That's going to build anxiety. That's
Yep.
going to build heart conditions. That's going to build maybe a kidney condition based off of your high blood pressure, right? So there are definitely other avenues you can go there. Now, that would be, I'm not a doctor, but that would be on the severe end of sleep apnea,
Right.
right? I think a
Yep.
very common sleep apnea secondary would be that hypertensive route.
Yep. Yep. Nice. Now, we skipped over secondaries for tinnitus, I think,
Mm,
which I don't want to leave that out. So let's talk about those secondary conditions that could be related to tinnitus that, oh, by the way, if the VA's proposed rule does take effect, you would lose out on if you lose tinnitus as a rating, because we need to have tinnitus as a claimed service connected condition that we could then leverage these secondaries off of. So again, it just is that call to action that if you do have tinnitus, the ringing in the ears, that filing for it sooner than later is important. And also you can file a claim for your tinnitus and the secondary conditions in one claim. So what are some of the secondaries you like or you think of or you hear often for tinnitus?
yeah, so there's three. The third one, not that common, but everyone knows tinnitus causes migraines, right? There is medical literature supporting that. Severe tinnitus definitely could cause anxiety, right? And that is exacerbated by hearing loss. So the hearing loss tinnitus combo is absolutely going to cause anxiety. You could imagine being deaf, you might be scared, right? Just walking down the sidewalk, hey, am I going to get hit by a car, right? That would be a Barney style example of tinnitus and anxiety. The third one that is not as common, but I've seen it enough to talk about it, is sleep apnea secondary to tinnitus. It's the same reason. Tinnitus, hearing loss, that stress on the body, constricting the insides of your
Mm,
body, that's obstruction. When you go to sleep, you think you're resting, right? As you're sleeping, but as you're resting, your body's
Yeah.
tightened up, right? And
Yeah.
then there we go. Sleep apnea, hypertension, anxiety, migraines. So
Yeah.
tinnitus is an anchor one. And
Yeah.
you had said something, and this is my number one question about tinnitus, is if you submit secondaries to tinnitus and under the new proposal, let's say a year from now,
Right.
and if tinnitus is an underlying symptom of this condition, does that give the VA the legal right to kind of say, hey, your tinnitus has been roped in with migraines, right? Um, there's a lot of mumbo jumbo jargon on that. I want to know what you have to say about that. And I know we're getting into the grandfathered in, but
Right.
that's a if the new rating has tinnitus as a symptom, does that give the VA the complete authority to say, hey,
Right.
you lost 10%?
Right. And that brings up a good point, because there are multiple conditions that you have that could have, the same symptoms, right?
Mhm.
So I have migraine headaches. I also have tinnitus. Um, the chicken and the egg, my migraines are service connected, not a secondary to tinnitus. So um, I think that the VA, in my opinion, allows for the overlapping of symptoms. So that's my overall take on that. However, with the new rule, right, being imposed potentially, eliminating tinnitus, I don't know if they're going to really have any additional kind of authority. I don't think that they're looking that deep into it. We all know that the VA does things about 70% of the way. There's always issues, and I get it. I'm not here to bash the VA. It's a gigantic system with a bunch of different chiefs that are trying to manage, and it's got a bunch of problems. And that's why we have so many, I guess, avenues in which to correct things along the way. Otherwise, we would have no sort of recourse. It would just be, well, that's it. So I don't think that the VA is looking that deeply into kind of the collateral effects or the secondary, in a different way of thinking of secondaries, right?
Mhm.
The secondary effects of their change. I think it's just, here's the change. And I don't think that they're going to look at overlapping symptoms or anything like that. I think that um, my big thing when it comes to secondaries for tinnitus, specifically for this, is I think that whatever evidence that you have today to support your claim for tinnitus, whether it's your MOS, AFSC, whatever, or you mentioned it while you were in service, or you're still in service, so now you go mention it since you're in service, whatever evidence that you can create to get that done, file for it. If you have evidence for your secondary conditions related to that, loop those in too if you have it today. If it's going to take you a couple months to get everything together on your secondary conditions, I would just personally file for tinnitus now
Agreed.
to get
Agreed.
that in place. And again, at the end of the day, if I had to bet, I don't think it's going to happen this year. Personally, I think it's going to happen after the election. And as I mentioned at the beginning, referencing another proposed rule from the VA, just like this is a proposed rule change, right? Proposed changes. It took them 5 years to implement it. So it could take 5 years. Who knows? But let's shift now to the next one, right? Mental health. So the two bad ones, right, if they go into effect, are tinnitus and sleep apnea. Both of those are horrendous. And I'm like you, I wish that I could read the comments that were put in. I don't know if they're public somewhere where we can read them. I don't know what the VA's thinking about it. I've personally thought of reaching out to Senator Tester on the Senate Veterans Committee, to his office, and setting up a meeting. He did some tremendous work in helping to mitigate some changes that were proposed by the VA recently. And so, I don't know if his voice might help to maybe limit the impact, right? Just another voice. Who knows? It's not a congressional thing. Again, it is a VA thing. So let's move on to the mental health. So my understanding is they're eliminating, the proposal would eliminate the 0%
Yes.
rating for mental health. So you can in no way, if you're get service connected, you will at least have a 10%. Now, to me, that's a win, right? Because now at least you're getting 10%. What other, are there anything? I remember one. Let's see if you remember it. What is something else that's super awesome about, not to sharpshoot you, I hope you get it, that's super awesome about the mental health proposed changes?
Yeah, so it really goes back to something. This is every time I read a VA decision letter from another veteran, the things the VA says are just I get a chuckle out of. And when I look at someone who's rated at 50% and they thought they were going to be 70, there's this little line in that letter that says the veteran most closely associates with 50%. What that means is, hey, you have 70% symptoms, but
Right.
we're going to give you 50%. That's what that means. Okay.
Yep.
And because the current 38 CFR schedule ratings for mental health is very ambiguous. If you look at it, you kind of just throw a bunch of symptoms up there, put 10, 30, 50, 70, 100 on there. That's about it, right? There's really no concrete evidentiary way to say you are 50, not 70. It's kind of like, I feel you're 50, right?
Right.
And so the new proposed changes is a number system, right? It's a criteria-based symptom. I forgot exactly the numbers. I'm just going to make them up here for the purposes of this. But let's say 50% is 3. So you have 3 of these symptoms. 70% is you have 4 of these symptoms. And so now I can objectively say you most closely associate with 50 because you have 3, right?
Yep.
And if you have 4, that's going to push you to 50 or 70. So my advice to any veteran that's hearing this, the second this goes into play, if you have a 50% rating and on your decision letter, it says most closely associated with 50, increase. I don't even need to know your current evidence. Increase, right? Without a doubt. So that's good.
Right. So one of the important things with this change is going from the 70 to 100%. You have the complete social and occupational kind of aspects for that 100% rating, and this would eliminate those, which is really important. Back to your point that being able to go in for that increase is important, and eliminating that will allow that, because now they probably are going to meet the criteria for that 100%. One of the interesting things in the press release, touching back on what you were talking about, is it states here, rather than assigning an evaluation based on the number and type of symptoms present for mental health, these changes would evaluate mental disorders based on how impactful the disability is across 5 domains of impairment, right? So cognition, interpersonal interactions and relationships, task completion, life activities, and navigating environments, as well as self-care. So that is fantastic. And I believe that is absolutely the right approach for mental health. The way that the rating schedule is written today is a very outdated way of viewing, I think, mental health. So this would be a huge, huge win. Now, when we talk about mental health, what's interesting is we talked about tinnitus having a secondary condition for mental health. Now, what happens is, and I've explained this before, and I know you have too, sometimes it's going to be very advantageous for you to file for that secondary condition for mental health, anxiety, depression, whatever, due to tinnitus. But if you have PTSD and you have other mental health conditions that you're rated for, it might not move the needle by saying that you're not sleeping or you have depression or whatever due to your tinnitus. So it's just something for veterans to be aware of, that the mental health rating schedule is it's its own umbrella, and it covers everything and gives you one rating. It's not like my back, my knee, my ankle gives me 3 ratings. It's your PTSD, your insomnia, and your depression all get put together to give you one mental health rating. So it's a little bit different. Are there any secondary conditions that you see from mental health that you could leverage from having some sort of a mental health rating that you would then be able to leverage secondaries from?
Absolutely. So it's a two-way street, right? There are conditions of secondary mental health, and the number one that really, really stands out that I see more than any others is a severe back condition causing depression, right? We see that a lot, and that is a moneymaker because, hey, my back hurts, my knee hurts, my son wants to play baseball. I can't enjoy his baseball games. I can't enjoy, right, that social occupational standard. I have difficulties connecting emotionally with my son just because of your back condition. Easy secondary for depression. So that's one avenue. Looking at secondaries from mental health, the one that stands out to me the most is GERD and IBS, right? GERD and IBS. Of note, so right now we see sleep apnea is that big bomb, that big 50% secondary to mental health. And generally speaking, sleep apnea secondary is a difficult claim, right? It's a coin flip on if the VA is going to rate that or not. And in this case, this is where a veteran might go get a medical opinion, right? And there are pros and cons to that. That's definitely debatable. But we're looking at mental health and then the proposed changes to sleep apnea, it might not be worth it, right? Why
Right,
am I going to pay $1,000 for a medical opinion to get a 0% rating for sleep apnea? Not worth
right,
it, right?
right,
And so now I think we're going to see more secondaries geared towards GERD, geared towards IBS, maybe some hypertension in there as well with on the anxiety side of the house. But I really think the GERD and IBS are going to kind of, be brought to light when we
right.
talk about secondaries for mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we got kind of 2 messages that are going out. One message is, look, if you have any of these conditions that are proposed for reduction or elimination, which would be your tinnitus or your sleep apnea, you should probably file those right away and get them out of the way. If you have additional things that you want to file for, maybe just file what you got now and put in an intent to file behind that and gather up your information for the just in case factor. Better safe than sorry, because changes are inevitable. Again, we don't know what they're going to be. All we can work with is what we got, which is the proposal. So the mental health aspect, on the other hand, is for those that have mental health ratings, it's a wait and see. If it goes into effect as proposed, you have a high probability of getting a higher rating if you file for an increase. So that's something that you should be paying attention to. Lastly, for those who already have these conditions rated, the 2 questions are really, am I safe? Number 1. And number 2 is, can I file for secondaries on these things, after the fact? If these changes go into effect, but I'm already rated for it, and then I develop a secondary, can I file for that? What's your take on that, Clay?
You absolutely can. Okay. So one thing I want to make very clear and kind of squash the what I call YouTube phenomenons. Okay, is it's a 38 CFR code. It's 3.951. Basically states it protects veterans' current ratings when a rating schedule is proposed and then finalized. Right. So that's where we're going to see whenever this goes down. That's what veterans are going to gravitate towards. The question is, if you file for an increase or if you file for a secondary, blanketly, if you give the VA a reason to look at mental health, is that going to give them evidentiary proof or the ability to lower and change that rating? This is up in the air. And what's weird, if you look at the 3.951, it's a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo. Per usual, it's very ambiguous. I think the VA is going to have a lot on their plate with this one because for the VA to change a rating when a schedule of ratings proposed changes goes into effect, they have to have two things. One, material evidence, right? They can't just be like, up, you're 30%. They have to have material evidence. Two, that material evidence has to show change based on the old criteria, because that's what you were rated. And then that material evidence has to correlate with the new criteria. And how different the new mental health ratings are to the old mental health ratings, I think that's going to be a very, very tough road for the VA to cross, at least without screwing over, like just blanketly, screwing over a lot of veterans. I don't think that's going to happen. There's a possibility. I really don't think that's going to happen, because you're going to see every single attorney become millionaires if that happens, right? I really don't think that will happen, because the criteria are so different. It's going to be a difficult road for the VA to battle, right?
Right. Yeah. So basically, grandfathered in is what we're looking at. And as far as filing for any secondaries based off of that, they would allow that to happen based on the fact that it is a service-connected condition. It's not like they're taking away a service-connected condition. You would be grandfathered in, have that still as a service-connected condition. And if that service-connected condition, based on the old rating schedule that's still in effect for you because you were grandfathered in, if that condition's causing something else, you can absolutely file for that. And again, I'm going to just kind of tie back into this press release from the VA. So we're, speaking from the VA's own mouth here. It states here, once again, there will be no change to any veteran's current ratings based on these proposed changes. When the proposed changes are finalized, which again indicates that they are going to happen, right? So when they are finalized,
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're saying it, not if, when these proposed changes are finalized, veterans who currently receive compensation for a service-connected condition can apply for increased compensation. That would be your mental health folks. And even if a veteran's symptoms no longer warrant the current evaluation they have based on the finalized changes, no reductions shall be made unless an improvement in the veteran's disability is shown to have occurred based on the last schedule used to assign their evaluation. Huge information, right? So the big point here is that, yes, changes are happening. Again, we don't know exactly, because the comments period does sometimes make the VA change a little bit in how they're going to implement it. And again, back to the beginning of this video, when I mentioned the fact that there is another proposed rule change that was put into effect, took 5 years to implement, and now it's here. They did listen to the comments, and they made some changes according to the comments received. So there could be some changes. And again, who knows? Might be, instead of eliminating tinnitus, they just drop it to a 0% rating. It's just a 0% compensation for that specific rating. And then only those that have secondaries based on it would be able to actually have some sort of compensation. So the big takeaway here, again, for those that are watching, is to file your claims. Watch out if there is these proposed changes for mental health, because that could warrant that uptick. If you're already rated, you're good to go. Don't worry about it. You are going to be grandfathered in, which is absolutely fantastic. And for those of you getting ready to get out, remember, there is a BDD claim, the benefits delivery of discharge. So you have 6 months to 3 months prior to discharge, whether it's retirement or discharge, not your terminal leave, your actual exit date. 3 to 6 month window in which you can file your BDD claim. Highly suggest doing that for multiple reasons. So with that, I think that we pretty much wrapped it up. Is there anything else you want to add to this, Clay?
I got one saved round on mental health, and there's 3 groups of people that this really, like, if you fall in these 3 groups, you need to tune in. And then there's kind of a 4th situational thing. The first one is going to be the folks that have TBI with mental health connected, right? How I'm reading the how mental health is going to be rated it implies it's going to be easier to separate those ratings, which is great. Okay, TBI is one of those ratings that if you have it, there are some very severe TBI cases, and it only
Right.
gets worse, right?
Yeah.
You're 26, 27, 32 years old with TBI. By the
Right.
time you're 50, you are going to feel those effects, right? So that's a great implication as I read the criteria.
Yeah.
The second one, we mentioned it earlier, is that 50% to 70% veteran. If you are 50 and you have 70% symptoms, increase. I wouldn't even think twice about it. The third one is going to be that 70 to 100% rating. If you have very, very severe mental health, right, especially PTSD, and you're on the high end of 70, I would probably file for an increase. It may not be as automatic as 50%. You may want to look at your evidence and say, hey, here's why I rate 100%. And you could look at the 5 criteria and say, yep, that's 5 points, right? And the
Right.
fourth one, situational, and let's just kind of blanketly say, it's implied that 100% for mental health is relatively easier now. That opens up the road for aid in attendance, various SMCs, and that is
Yeah.
a huge deal, right?
And for those that don't know, SMC is special monthly compensation. It's a whole other rating schedule for veterans who have more complicated situations, right? One of my biggest pet peeves out there is that people think that 0 through 100 is the rating schedule, period. And if you're 100%, that means you're the most messed up that you could possibly be. And it's simply not true. There's the whole other rating schedule, SMC, that warrants either an add-on to your standard compensation, or they just slide you all the way over into the SMC rating schedule, which can pay out substantially more on a monthly basis.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody so much for watching. We appreciate you. Please subscribe, like, all that good stuff. And remember, if we don't take care of each other, something went wrong.